Good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Connie. I'm Connie Fuchsa with Foot Title Group, where we protect your home ownership. How are you today? What a fabulous day. I'm so excited to have you guys with us. Sorry for the mix up with the camera. Sometimes it doesn't set exactly up like I want it to, and so sometimes things get a little haywire. So how you guys doing today? I absolutely love it when you guys ask me questions. And one of the reasons that I do this and I try to get on and talk to you guys about things with respect to real estate is because I want you to understand, be equipped, be able to ask questions, you don't have to understand it all, but you have to know where to get your information. And so I like to try to give you as much information as I can because this process is so complicated and can be very complicated. And there's a lot of different nuances and there's a lot of different hands and people and stuff involved. And so I like to try to get on and talk with you guys about what some of those things mean. So when you ask me questions, it helps me a lot understand what kind of things you need to know, because I know a lot of things that we deal with every day and a lot of questions that customers ask us every day, but I don't always know exactly what you're looking for. So I love it when you ask questions. A couple days ago, I had somebody ask me a question about this whole trust thing. And so a lot of times we don't talk about the seller side of the closing because the seller doesn't have as much to do as the buyer does. So there's a whole lot more to talk about on the buyer's perspective. But today we're going to talk for a minute about the seller side because this trust question is really can be a little bit involved. And so you need to understand the picture if you put it in your property in a trust. So first of all, let's talk a teeny bit about a trust and what that means and where it came from and how it is. Let me qualify by saying I'm not an attorney, and I also do not do mortgages, and I don't sell real estate. I do own a title company. I've been working in that title company for more than 30 years, so I have lots of different experiences. So what I'm going to talk to you about is things that I know, and then as you maybe have an additional question, if I can't answer it, we're going to find the right person to answer it for you. So that's solely my purpose, is to get you some information. Hey there, Michelle. Good morning. Thanks for tuning in. So today we're going to talk about trust for a minute. If you're selling your house and at some point during your ownership, you were advised to put your property into a trust for estate planning purposes, that's great. You just have to understand what needs to be done in order to sell that piece of property. So when you put your property in a trust, you personally don't own that property anymore. The trust owns it. So now think of the trust as like a business. The trust is an entity that actually owns that piece of property. And now that the entity owns that piece of property, there's some rules and specific things that determine how that entity can sell that piece of property. So typically when you put your property in a trust, there is a trust document that's created that creates the rules on what happens with that trust. And the trusts were created to, as I said, for some estate planning purposes some years ago when the federal tax laws were different than what they are now. I don't think they're quite as common right now, but to put your property in trust. But with that being said, again, I'm not an estate planning attorney, so I can't speak to that intelligently, but I just don't see it as frequently as we did some years ago. So when you have a trust, in the trust documents, it says who owns or who can control the trust, what the jobs are of the people that are involved. And so typically it sets up a trustee, and a trustee is the person that actually, in most cases, based on what the trust documents say, is the person that controls what the trust can do. So the trustee is set up to actually act on behalf of the trust. So let's say, for example, I put my property in a trust. Now the trust, let's say it's the Connie Fuchsa Trust, owns my home, owns my whatever. The Connie Fuchsa Trust is the entity that owns the trust. Now we all know an entity isn't a living person, so they can't physically sign documents. So that trust has to assign a trustee to act on its behalf. And so the trust documents will typically state who that trustee is and how that trustee can act. So if something happens to, typically the trust is set up, if something happens to the person that is the trustee, it will say that someone else will act is the substitute trustee or the successor trustee. So let's say in the example that the trust is in my name, Connie Fuchsa Trust, and I want to sell my property, then the trust is actually the seller of that property. And if I'm listed as the trustee, then I sign all the documents as the trustee, not the owner. It has to be as the trustee because I'm acting on that behalf. Now, some trusts may have more than one trustee that have to act together. Let's also take, for example, and in this question that I had earlier in the week, the trust owns the property and the people that were the trustees have passed away. So the trust then governs what happens if those trustees pass away. Who can sell that property for the trust? And it typically will say, who the successor is if something happens to that trustee. But you have to understand that you physically don't own your property anymore. The trust does. Now, as long as you're the trustee, you control what happens. But if something happens to you, then what happens next? And so that's where some of the questions would arise. And the trust document is going to be what that title company needs to see to be able to determine how that title is going to change hands from the seller to the buyer, that seller being the trust. So hopefully I didn't confuse you more, but maybe brought up some questions that you may have. And if you're dealing with a trust and the trust takes out a mortgage, the person that's signing for the trust, again, is listed in those trust documents. So everybody's going to want to see those trust documents when you're selling that piece of property. Or let's say you're refinancing your property. You own the property in a trust and you want to do a new mortgage, then the trust owns the property. The mortgage company has to approve that that trust is going to be the borrower on that new mortgage, because you don't own that piece of property, so you can't be the borrower. The owner is the actual trust. So just think of it as a company or a business that is not a physical human being that owns that business, who can act on behalf of that business. In the same case, who can act on behalf of that trust. So hopefully I helped you answer some questions, maybe brought up a question, maybe made you think about things a little bit differently. As I said, what I like to try to do is spur those questions and encourage you to ask questions. I also encourage you to hit that share button, because if you hit that share button, a couple things will happen. Number one, people that you know will then get the benefit of getting some of this good information as well. And you also get the chance to win this really cool coffee mug. 20-ounce coffee mug. Share coffee with Connie when we're talking a couple times a week. You can be drinking your coffee right out of your Coffee with Connie mug. If you hit that share button, the person hits the share the most each month, I'll deliver that coffee mug to you. So please hit that share button, and please let me know if you have any additional questions. I love helping you with information. That's the whole reason I do this, and hopefully I expand your thought a little bit about how closing and real estate and mortgages and title work. So I hope you have a fantastic day. Thanks so much for tuning in to Coffee with Connie. I'm Connie Fuchsa, and I hope you guys have an amazing day. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.